Hello everyone, I'm Rishi Persad. Welcome back to another episode of Racing Weekly, a podcast and YouTube show brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. And as always, Sam Turner is with me to reflect on what we've seen just recently and look ahead to what promises to be a pretty exciting week in the sport of horse racing. As usual, last week, Sam, pretty dramatic as much as exciting on and off the course. There's a lot to talk about this week. How do you sum up what we all had to is endure the right word in the sport over the last 7 days?
Rish, I mean, they never fail to provide a little bit of content for us, do they? The powers that be. Some really interesting developments, really. I think some positive developments in some respects. Whether the Newbury sort of fiasco, if you'd like to name it that, was a positive development, I don't know. But sometimes you have to go worse to get better in this game, and hopefully that might bring one or two issues to a head. And I can certainly understand why the horsemen took the decision that they did.
Well, not just obviously what happened at Newbury on the weekend, but the Whip Review Committee came up with their 20 recommendations, a couple of really interesting and quite significant moves in the sport of racing to discuss as well, Sam. So I think maybe we kick off, though, with the action on the course, because it's a little bit easier to at least discuss and understand. So it's time for this week's Racing Recap. And we'll start off in Ireland with this week's edition of Racing Recap. And obviously, we were hoping to see Emily Upjohn in the Irish Oaks. Sam, she didn't make it because of an issue with the plane getting her there. Nevertheless, it still provided a thrilling race, although I have a question mark about the validity, the strength of form, perhaps.
Yeah, possibly. I don't think we can knock the winner, because I think she's the type of filly that just always finds more. We saw evidence of that in the Ribblesdale. I think we saw evidence of it again at the Curragh. She just always just about does enough, but I never felt that Toy was ever really going to get past her in the last 100, 150 yards. She was always just pulling out that bit more. She got a great attitude, brilliant temperament. She's pretty much push button. You could put her anywhere in the race. She's got that change of gear, and then she's obviously got the game and resilient temperament to withstand any late challenges. I thought it was a really smart performance. Good to see her go one better than her stablemates. I think Jack Naylor and KM Pepper were both sort of second in the previous race, like she was. At Ribblesdale, and then came on to the Oaks and finished second in the Irish Oaks. And she's managed to do that. So it was third time lucky for the Harrington team. And very popular winner, I would imagine. Local winner, 5-4 favourite on a busy Saturday at the Curragh.
Yeah, second Irish Classic for Jessie Harrington. Alpha Centauri won the Guineas a few years back, and Magical Lagoon obviously winning the Irish Oaks. And she might head for the Yorkshire Oaks next. She's 4-1 with Bet365 for that. I mean, were she to go there, it would potentially be quite a clash again against the likes of Emily Upjohn and maybe one or two others.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, big mouth-watering prospect, really. And I just like her because she's just very solid, isn't she? And she's a typical Harrington horse in that she's getting stronger as the season wears on, really. Alpha Centauri was a little bit the same, and they've had one or two that have just progressed as the season's worn on, and she's certainly doing that. I think she finds a way of winning, which I like about her as well. She's just developing into a professional winner, and very much a mare that you want, or a filly that you want to have on side, really, in these middle distance races. It'll be fascinating to see her go up against Emily Upjohn if that battle does actually take place on the Naesmire.
Am I right? Am I being a bit harsh with suggesting that the race didn't take as much winning as we thought it would do? Obviously, the start of the week, we're probably thinking Tuesday and Emily Upjohn would be lining up for the race, and without the 1-2 in the Oaks at Epsom.
Yeah. And without above the curve as well, which was quite a notable absentee. We sort of read that, though, didn't we, doing the pod last week with Andy Holding? We were sort of discussing the runners and riders and what might actually go for the race. And I thought it was debatable that Tuesday would go so quickly after quite a hard race in the Irish Derby. And above the curve was obviously pulled out because the ground was probably a bit too quick and they've got other targets in mind. So, like you say, once Emily Upjohn's plane didn't manage to leave the turf or the track or the runway, then it meant that the race was going to be lacking a little bit of star quality, really. But Magical Lagoon won't mind that. She managed to get it done in good game and resilient fashion, and onwards and upwards for her. But yeah, as a race, I felt that it wasn't a great race, but it was a nice performance, wasn't it? And it just sort of managed to put a little bit more gloss on her season and add a bit of luster to that Ribblesdale performance.
Well, obviously, we'll talk more about Emily Upjohn a little bit later in the show when we talk about the King George coming up on the weekend. But you mentioned Andy Holding's name. Andy Holding was quite keen on a horse called Monista in the Sapphire Stakes at the Curragh on the weekend, just touched off by Ladies Church. It was a very exciting race. I thought Monista was going to win it.
Yeah, she's, well, forever the bridesmaid, isn't she, Monista? A horse that travels beautifully through her races, and she looked to have that race in safekeeping. It was a bit frustrating that the nicely backed Ladies Church came and picked her pocket late on. I fancied her a little bit at Royal Ascot, to be honest, in that 5 furlong handicap, and I just don't know whether the whole event got to her a little bit. And I think reading sort of Johnny Murtaugh's comments afterwards, they took the hood off, obviously. And that seemed to light her up a little bit. Maybe she was just a bit docile at Ascot, or just a bit, in a big field, got lost somewhere at the Berkshire venue. And she was much more at home back at the Curragh, put up a smart performance. I think she's going to be pretty aggressively campaigned as the season wears on, reading the quotes.
Yeah, that was a really game performance. The attitude was very admirable in the closing stages. Also worth mentioning the Scurry handicap, where we had a win for Jason Hart and John Quinn. Mr. Wagyu could potentially go for the Stewards Cup, but he looks to be a sprinter who's loving life at the moment.
Yeah, I think we touched on him a few pods back, didn't we? And sort of put him up as an anti-post bet for the Stewards Cup at around 20, I think he was, with Bet365 at the time. Just an incredible horse in June and July. You look at his stats there. I don't think he's won outside those 2 months. So it's a bit like you and me, Rish. We love the sun. We love a little bit of warmth on our bones. And Mr. Wagyu is exactly the same. 15 from 29 now across those 2 months, which is an absolutely extraordinary record for a sprinter. Nearly 50% strike rate. Quite astounding, especially when you sort of delve into some of the races that he's tackling and the fields that he's having to beat. And he looked beat at the Curragh, really, didn't he? With a couple of furlongs to run, he'd done plenty of running up front. The come home time was pretty slow, so they'd obviously gone very hard early. And he just managed to keep boxing on and fighting off challenge after challenge, and sneaked home from the unlucky runner-up Big Gossi, who runs the track supremely well and posted another great performance. But Mr. Wagyu, I think now 9-1, I think, with Bet365 for the Stewards Cup. So granted a good draw, you'd expect him to go well again, especially as that's still in the month of July.
Just. The Bet365 Hackwood Stakes moving over to Newbury on the weekend. There's a horse that at the start of the season, I know that Jim Crowley and Owen Burrows thought very highly of, and he's fulfilling that potential now. That's Minzao. He was a very good 2-year-old. They've always expected big things of this horse, and that was, I thought, a pretty smart performance, a taking one in the context of the sprinters this season, in domestic sprinters anyway.
Yeah, put to bed a disappointing effort with the cheap pieces on the Ascot the time before, a race that is working out quite well. But I don't think Ascot's his favourite venue. I think he's run 4 times there now, finished 4th, 2nd, 3rd, and out the frame. Elsewhere, he's 3 from 5, so he clearly loves York, and he showed that he liked Newbury as well. So, maybe they'll evaluate where he goes next. I would have thought that the Haydock Park Sprint with a bit of juice in the ground would be absolutely ideal for him. Clearly, that looks a good opportunity for him, and they'll probably go for the champion sprint, won't they? But, bear in mind those Ascot stats, that they're not absolutely top class stats there. So maybe they might evaluate where they finish off with Minzao. But good to see him back. I thought it was an informative race. I thought 1 or 2 horses ran extremely well. And in the backwash, the horse that was near side, whose name escapes me, of Hugo Palmer's, I thought that was a really good run. Yeah, Dubawi Legend going sprinting for the first time with the pieces on, 25-1. Normally you would say, as you know, you've been to Newbury a number of times this year for Racing TV, the near side rail has been a bit of a dead duck, really. You don't want to be alongside there in the soup. But, we saw evidence on Saturday that perhaps with the watering, with the dry spell, this near side rail hasn't been such a negative. But that, even with that in mind, I thought Dubai Legend ran really well on his own down the near side.
Yeah, and I think it's quite nice that he's bounced back, considering what a good 2-year-old he was last year. And there've been a few disappointments. It's nice to see him showing that ability once again. Just a word about Owen Burrows as well, Sam. I think, given the fact that he hasn't got a large stable, Hookham, his potential stable star this season, injured. Whether he hits the track again, we don't know. He keeps battling away, and he keeps coming up with a big winner. It must be quite a lot of perseverance and determination.
I think he's been tremendously resilient this year. Obviously, winning a John Smith as well, with first time out horse in Anmat, a horse that was placed in the Cambridgeshire last year, might be a horse that will probably go back to Newmarket and try and go one or two better. I think he's done exceptionally well, to get Minzao back, Hookham obviously winning a Group 1. It's been very frustrating, a bit like Rafe Beckett in some respects. He lost scope, but then he's won an Irish Derby. It just shows you the pitfalls and positives in training racehorses, really. But hopefully Owen Burrows will start to get some patronage from outside of his normal sources and build up his stable that way and not be so reliant on Shadwell, because unfortunately that ship sailed a little bit. They have kept a lot of loyalty and kept horses with him, and he's showing that he can still do the job. And yeah, it's been difficult for him. No doubt it's been really tough, and they've probably had to let staff go, and there've been all sorts of different changes and alterations to the way that he operates. But he's reinventing himself at the moment. It's good to see.
Good on him. You mentioned the nearside rail at Newbury, which is, we've discussed many times, as you just said, it's not the place to be. But Dubawi Legend ran pretty well in that race. And of course, Eddie's boy, who was drawn right down on the nearside rail. Holly Doyle decided to keep Eddie's boy to that rail, and it proved very fruitful. And in the end, how impressed were you by what that horse did?
Oh, he showed blistering acceleration, didn't he? Another winner to come out the Windsor Castle. I think that's six horses that have won subsequently out of that race. Red hot piece of form. Keep your eye on that form going forward. And yeah, they just never really saw which way it went. I mean, I haven't seen any overhead pictures, but that, those drone pictures would be really informative there, just to see, where he was at halfway, whether he was well clear. But played a lone furrow up the standside rail. Holly Doyle wasn't hanging around, and while one or two in behind were getting caught in amongst the backwash. Most notably, I thought Dare to Hope, Andy Holding's tip from last week, who was really, really unlucky down the standside rail, got the door shut in his face about 18 times. A bit like me going for a job in my 20s. He just couldn't get a passage through, could he? And that was his race done. But there'll be another day for him and another sales race probably further down the line. But really, really impressive performance from Eddie's boy, and a nice big pot for the connections.
You don't have that sort of problem nowadays, do you, Sam?
I believe me, I do, Rish. Believe me, I do.
Even with those silver fox looks?
Even with these silver fox stuff. Unfortunately, there's plenty of 50-plus males with grey hair looking for jobs at the moment, Rish.
Speaking of 2-year-olds, obviously from that super sprint at Newbury, we're going back to Ireland. And Little Big Bear in the Anglesey Stakes, he looked very, very good. I mean, obviously he's always been well thought of, but I thought that was a marker performance for the rest of the season ahead.
Definitely. Obviously, Blackbeard won in France over the weekend as well, so it was a good weekend for the Ballydole juveniles, and he was very impressive, Blackbeard, more so than I think he has been at any stage this season. But yeah, Little Big Bear, I thought he was really, really taking performance. Look, he was 2 to 5, extremely well supported. And races like the Dewhurst and the National Stakes will definitely be on the agenda of him going forward, I would think. I was really taken with him, and I think he's risen to the top of the Ballydore pecking order when it comes to colts, a 2-year-old colts. I thought there was also a nice performance as well from Hans Andersen, making all and stepping up on that Tipperary run first time up, when he looked just in need of experience, but he looked very much more the model in that first race on the Curragh card as well. So I liked him.
Just last week, we spoke about Royal Acclaim for the Nunthorpe, and Little Big Bear has got a quote of 6-1 with Bet365 for the Nunthorpe. Whether he lines up in that race is a question, but were he to be pointed at the Nunthorpe, what do you reckon?
Personally, I wouldn't necessarily like his chance that much. I think now that he's shown 6.5 on a stiff track like the Curragh is well within his grasp, I wonder whether they'll go the orthodox route with him. I mean, it's all supposition, obviously, but if he were mine, I think I would just go that tried and trusted route. He's progressing nicely. I don't know whether I'd want to run him over 5 against some true speed balls at York, where you're a little bit of a hostage to the draw, you're a little bit of a hostage to track position, as we know there, especially the ground stage drive for the next month or so. And just get him on his head a little bit. I thought he just raced beautifully at the Curragh on Saturday, travelled sweetly, picked up really well, beat a couple of decent yardsticks as well, very comfortably. yeah, I like that performance. I'd rather probably see National Stakes or Dewhurst, those sort of races really on his schedule going forward.
All right, just been through a couple of other horses that I'll mention. Grocer Jack, who won the Bet365 Stevenson Stakes at Newbury. That was pretty impressive, making most of the running. Rashun, who won that handicap. Just mentioned those two domestically before I mentioned a horse abroad.
Yeah, I mean, good performance from Grocer Jack. Certainly very well backed, and did plenty wrong in the early part of the race, didn't he? He was a bit too keen and exuberant, but he got that much quality that he just ran them into the ground. And yeah, Cadillac's looking an expensive purchase. Probably needs to go back to Leopardstown. Seems to be the only place he ever wins. And Rashun, I mean, good old Rashun. He's put 3 or 4 really good runs together of late. Not least 2 at Royal Ascot, where don't quite know how he didn't bring home the gold medal on one of those occasions. And then obviously winning that race that he'd won previously as well. Ian Williams with Stayers, absolutely brilliant trainer, galloped all the way to the line. I don't know whether he got a Goodwood or not, but he's in the heart of his life at the moment. He's a really good nick, and they might as well keep pressing on with him.
Now, on Thursday in France, the Grand Prix de Paris won by Ernesto. Gets a quote of 16-1 for the Arc. My first impression, I've only watched the race as it was run live at the time on television. I thought that was really impressive, the way that horse picked up. I like the quality of the race. Maybe Pids Badil ran disappointingly, but the other horses seemed to run to a fair level. And I thought he won with a bit in hand. I like this horse. I think there's a lot more progression to come as well. And 16-1 was relatively appealing in what is shaping up to be quite an exciting race. I'm just having a look down here. Desert Crown, this is with Bet365, 11-4. Verdini, 6-1. Westover, 6-1. Emily Upjohn, 7s. Title holder, 10s. Alpinista, 12s. Torquato Tasso, last year's winner, 16s. Tuesday, Honesto, Nashua. Free Wind, all 16s. Who would have thought that Hurricane Lane and Adayar would both be 20s at the start of the season? Who would have thought that come the week before the King George, that those two would be 20-1 for the Arc?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, I don't think the speed figure was too shabby either last week. Yeah, for Ernesto, I think that was pretty tidy as well. So that was a step up on what he'd managed to achieve before, and he's obviously thriving. The only thing you'd say is that the one time that he sort of tackled a big field, he was found wanting a little bit by Verdini and just didn't travel with any great fluency there. He seemed happier in a smaller field the other day. He's not probably going to get that Arc day, unfortunately. He doesn't mind a bit of cut in the ground. Obviously, gets on very well with Stefan Pasquier, and he's thriving and improving. And we know what 3-year-olds can do if they get on a roll. I'm not sure which his prep race will be. I don't know if you've heard anything.
I don't know, but I would imagine, given the way he's going, small field in the Niel, would be ideal, and then on to the Arc. But who knows what now between now and then. Interesting. Stefan Pasquier was blaming himself a little bit for what happened in the French Derby. He was a bit critical of the fact that he didn't really get to grips with that race, and was happy to put a line through it. But you're right. On the face of it, he would have something to prove in a bigger field. But just the bare facts of what he can do, if he's able to find the right conditions to do it, is, I think, quite exciting at 16s.
Yeah, and obviously stepping up to, he's by Frankel, stepping up to 12 furlongs as well. He's ticked the Longchamp box. He's managed to win there. So there are a lot of positives for him. And some would say, well, he's done well to overcome the small field and, perhaps a bit of a sluggish early pace and a quickening tempo, which is more than perhaps one or two of the visitors managed to do. So, I bet there's a few positives. Plus, not least, he will go on the ground.
Yes.
I could certainly see the case for him at a big price.
Are you keeping hydrated, Sam? Because it is very hot.
Very hydrated, Rish. It's only water as well. It's too early for anything else.
Of course it is. And the reason why is because we need a little pause, a little drink, rehydrate, because that's it for Racing Recap. And coming up next, it's Talking Topics. Right, Sam. A couple of very important topics to talk about. We touched on both at the top of the show. The whip rules, the changes, the recommendations, and of course, once again, the subject of field sizes, prize money, racecourse contributions, etc. to the fore. Let's deal with the whip rules first of all. We knew that this was coming. We knew that they were going to come up. The committee, the review panel, were going to come up with 20 recommendations. I'm not going to ask you to go through all 20, but there were a couple that were pretty significant to do with forehand, backhand use of the whip, and obviously the possibility of disqualification should there be excessive use of it.
Yeah. And those are probably the two headline pointers, weren't they? Look, I think the starting point is that this was a collaborative process, which I think is very, very important moving forward as a sport, that we acknowledge that not everybody likes the way that the sport operates. I don't think we should be dictated to by those people who don't, because we will always have the dissenters, and that's an absolute certainty, no matter what we do. And if the whip was ever done away with, there would be something else that would be found to try and knock the sport. So at least it was a proactive, collaborative process, a well-balanced panel, I think, intelligent people who were well averse to the pitfalls of this discussion and were keen to try and find a compromise and a way forward that suited all parties. I think talking or hearing some of the jockeys talk, the senior members of the weighing room, obviously PJ McDonald, Tom Scudamore, and others were consulted. They were actually on the panel, but other jockeys were consulted for technical reasons, etc. Talking to those experienced riders, they seem fairly comfortable with the new measures that were brought in and will soon be trialled in that initial process before it sort of goes live and all systems go in the autumn. And I think that's encouraging that the riders, even though it's quite a dramatic change in riding style for them to go from using the whip in a forehand position to the backhand position. I think
I'm going to ask you to demonstrate.
I can only do that in one armchair, Rich, because I am an armchair jockey, obviously.
The forehand is this position where they can get that.
Yeah.
And the backhand is where the whip is. Sorry, the forehand will be like that. So you can use the whip in that position. The backhand is that the whip is here, so they can. It's a more sort of lower circular motion, less force seemingly imparted on the strike of the horse,
and more likely to be directed into the area just because of the natural sort of biology of it. Where a horse should be hit basically with a pro-cush. So it ticks a couple of boxes, and you hear jockeys talk. I heard Harry Gobden talking the other day. He's already practicing, and I think we've got a generation of riders now who I think less abusive with the whip than any I've ever seen in previous decades. Basically, I've been watching races since my late teens, 1947 onwards, and it's I think it's a very encouraging that they are willing to try and adapt, and there hasn't been any resistance to this. And I think obviously the change in style of use of the whip is something that's going to take a bit of getting used to, but they will get there. And as for the disqualification with the 4 strikes over the 7 on the flat or 8 on the jumps, I think that's a good measure as well, and I'm hoping that works as a strong deterrent in the bigger races.
All right. I would certainly agree with that. I think it's a very strong deterrent, and I think those who are worried about, so I've heard a couple of bookmakers mention the fact that they might be concerned about how many races will result in disqualification. Personally, I'd be surprised if there's going to be a flood of races. I can't that jockeys, trainers, owners in collaboration with each other would be tolerant, and it would be something to in terms of a deterrent and being a preventative measure. I think it will work. The point of discussion and debate about this, Sam, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, is the context in which these rules have been formulated. And there's a lot of chat about whether or not we've done the right thing in trying to appease people who will never be appeased because the perception and welfare of the sport of horse racing as a whole and the use of the whip as a part of that, or whether we have done the right thing and we've got on the front foot ahead of the curve, whatever cliche you want to come up with, that we are being protective of the sport from being put under the microscope for a welfare issue, which it often is. But how deep that goes, it's obviously questionable. So how do you deal with that argument and those people who say, look, why are we bothering with all these people who don't really care about the sport anyway, and they just say what they want and don't really care about the whip?
Yeah, no, I understand, Rich. Personally, I think four, going up to four over, or if you exceeded four from the levels that they are at the moment, it's quite a big margin, to be honest. It's 7 strikes up to 11. I think you'll find a few jocks will probably go 8, 9, and they might just push the boundaries, which would obviously incur a ban for themselves, but they'd still keep the race. I think in these instances, in the world that we live in at the moment, I do think it's better to be on the front foot and start regulating our own sport and taking control of these issues. I think we've seen perhaps with one or two aspects of the sport, one or two areas of the sport where it's been unregulated and people have sort of fell asleep holding the ball, so to speak. I think that has come back to bite them. And I think getting on the front foot with these issues, getting together a good wide-ranging panel of intelligent people, talking it through methodically, working through this system correctly, and coming up with a framework of rules which most parties are comfortable with. Yes, okay, the RSPCA aren't happy with it, but you will never ever appease them. The one thing I find quite odd with this is that show jumping and other equestrian sports seem absolutely completely, they have carte blanche to do whatever they like. Basically, they don't get picked up at all, basically probably because there's no betting on those sports. So it's not such, you don't get such headlines if you started having a go at show jumping or cross country or any of the other equestrian sports. And let's be honest, some of those cross country tests and assignments for horses are hard work on hot days, jumping in and out of lakes, riders carry whips. There's a lot of it's a big examination for a horse on those. Now they're robust horses and they're built to cope with that. That's fine, but they seem to carry on without any need for any censure, whereas horse racing is always in the firing line. And I do understand those who feel that this could be quite a messy way of actually resolving races and things, and we could be going down the road, we could be facing legal battles, etc. So I do understand all that, but I do think we've got to take the bull by the horns in racing and really just make sure that we are on the front foot with these things. And we're not trying to appease, we're just trying to come into the 21st century and just keep having a process which evolves and grows and educates people. And I think when they see that you're looking to do something and looking to try and not tidy up your sport, but ensure that it is very much in the 2022, I think that needs to be commended, really.
On that, I think what people perhaps who are so anti having to work within the context of people who have an issue with the welfare or don't really care that much about the sport but will raise the use of the whip every so often, is that if we are showing that we can look at our sport and make changes for the better in the world of welfare, then it would lead us to contain or maintaining that control. And people, whether it's a government or authorities beyond the sport of horse racing, they'll be less determined to come and take that control from us. And once we have that control, at least we can be able to dictate within the parameters of the sport that we know, and losing that control would be a scary thing. So I think the fact that the BHA came up with this concept of creating the group to decide on these recommendations is overall to be applauded. Just running out of time on talking topics, but I must mention the race at Newbury, where no declarations were made in protest of paltry prize money for a race of that ilk at what some trainers have described as a Grade 1 track. What were your thoughts, your views on what happened at Newbury last weekend?
Yeah, I thought it was justified action, to be honest, Rich. I don't like to see these things happening, but I think enough is enough sometimes. I think, Newbury is a Grade 1 track, and I think for a while now, I've thought it for a good while, having seen some of the prize money, looking at their races on a daily basis, having to do those for tips, etc., and also a little bit of race planning or whatever. I thought that the prize money at some of these top tracks around the country, I think they trade on their name a little bit. And I think fair play to the horsemen if they want to go down that road and try and force the issue. I don't think it is good enough. I think Newbury is obviously a beautifully presented track. You know, the turf management's excellent and people love running horses there. It's a fair test. And I think that sort of sometimes covers up the lack of prize money, because obviously Nicky Henderson was very happy to run, you know, his novices there, and all the top boys on the flat, the Hannons of this world, Godolphin, etc. They're all happy to introduce their 2-year-olds there, and they don't necessarily go there for prize money. But there's a lot of people in the sport that need very competitive prize money, and if they're going to go to Newbury and perhaps run into a Nicky Henderson novice or a Godolphin 2-year-old or a Hannon 2-year-old, then at least being able to compete for a decent figure is the very least they could expect. And you know, you see certain figures bandied about. Now I don't know whether there's any strength in these, but you see certain figures bandied about for media rights that course in particular has taken in the last 12 months. And then you look at some of the prize money levels, it's really, really poor. And this is a bee in the bonnet with me. Nobody knows what these tracks are taking from, you know, the media rights. Nobody will ever give you a straight answer when it comes to media rights. It's unbelievable. It'd be easier to find out what Boris Johnson's earning and the various committees that he sits on. You can't find out anything about media rights that go to these various tracks. So I think that's one area of the sport that we could do with shining a light into, to be honest.
Well, I think it's inevitable that this sort of action is going to happen. It's likely to happen with more frequency, because we are, you know, we talk about so many things in this world that we are at tipping point, and certainly in the sport of our little world of horse racing, we are definitely at tipping point with regards to prize money and fixtures. And it's the fact that no one does anything. Ultimately, we do a lot of talking, we do a lot of suggestions, and we have ideas of what's going to happen, but very little gets done. And unless action is taken, whatever action that might be, nothing's going to change. You know, you have to take action for an effect and for effect. And I think it's probably the first of many. So let's see how it all pans out. We could keep going on with talking topics because there's so much good debate to be had. Obviously, if anybody out there has their own views, we'll be certainly willing to hear those and get in touch with us by the usual ways. But that is it for talking topics for this week on Racing Weekly. Well, it's time to look ahead to the racing at Ascot in particular on the weekend, and delighted to have Bet365's Pat Cooney with us to help do that. Pat, first of all, how are you? How are you coping with this lovely warm weather?
Yes, I'm full of the factor 50s, I think I'm up to now. So I'm going
inside
up
your house.
Yeah, so looking forward to it. So enjoyed the golf over the weekend, and I was at Newbury as well. That was good fun. But looking forward to Ascot on Saturday, no doubt.
Well, perhaps you can start with giving us a little précis of the odds for the King George. Sadly, of course, no Desert Crown. He was ruled out last week, but still a high-class lineup.
A high-class lineup, you are correct. There are only 6 declared at the 5-day declaration stage, and our latest prices is 6-5 Westover, 2 Emily Upjohn, 4 Mishriff, 12 Torquato Tasso, 14 Broome, and 16 Pile Driver. Now, normally when there's 6 runners, you think, oh no, a bit like the Eclipse, what's going to make the run-in? We don't have to worry about that this time around. There's 2 recognised front runners, aren't there? Pile Driver and Broome. So it's going to be a proper 1.5 mile test, this. And dare I say, no excuses for in terms of pace angles. But I'm just looking at the ground, good to firm. I was looking at Torquato Tasso. Someone said to me, why is he 12-1? Well, he won the Arc on heavy ground, didn't he? So can he come out and win a King George on fast ground? That remains to be seen. And Westover and Emily Upjohn, neither of them have run on fast ground before. I suppose the scary thing is they might be even better on it. So that's the way the market is. Westover continues to be popular, and Emily Upjohn, Frankie going to have to get down to 8 stone 9. So I'd keep out of his way all week. I'm sure he won't be the most pleasant of company trying to get the weight off.
Yeah, of course, he was going to ride Pile Driver, but then when Emily Upjohn was switched to the King George, Frankie's obviously going to ride Emily Upjohn. I believe that she might be racing in the colours of the Lloyd Webbers, who are part owners now of Emily Upjohn. But just very quickly, I wanted to ask you both about this because it's a very topical thing. A lot of people have mentioned it before. I'm sure they'll mention it again this week. Colin Keane on Westover again, despite the fact that Connection suggested that Rob Hornby wasn't selected to Westover at the Curragh because of knowledge of the track, and obviously Colin Keane's relationship with Juddmonte also playing a part. What are your thoughts on jockey for Westover in the King George? I'll start with you, Sam.
I was a bit disappointed for Rob, to be honest. I think back on home turf, he proved at the Newmarket July meeting that he's more than up to the job. And I understand the decision. I mean, it's difficult to jock off a rider who's just won you a classic in Ireland, isn't it? But Colin Keane's yet to ride a win around there in the last 4 or 5 years. I don't think he's got great stats at Ascot. And
not for 46 in the last 5 years, I believe.
Right. Well, to be fair to him, he's not coming over it for those sort of 4 or 5 runner early season races. He's obviously riding at Royal Ascot in big fields, etc. So they are a little bit distorted, probably, those figures. And he's gone close a number of times, obviously, including in the last meeting there. So, yeah, you've got a top class rider. It's hard to get rid of him. And if you do sort of jock him off and Rob comes in and things don't work out, you look a little bit of a fool there, don't you? Whereas the percentage call is to stick with the tried and trusted, really, now that you've gone down that route. The interesting one for me, Rich, would be if, say Aidan O'Brien hadn't had a runner, what would they have done then with Richard Kingscote and Ryan Moore?
Well, I would imagine, I mean, my thoughts were that if Aidan O'Brien didn't have a runner, that Ryan Moore would ride Desert Crown. That still seems to be the agreement. I mean, Richard Kingscote said that much himself after the derby with regards to Desert Crown. What are your thoughts, Pat, very, very quickly on the whole Westover, Colin Keane, Rob Hornby?
Yeah, I just wonder, fellas, if they're just looking long-term with Westover and thinking he might be going abroad. And Colin Keane has got Breeders' Cup experience. He's probably ridden in Japan as well, if they're thinking, races over there. I think it might just be, it doesn't really matter who rides him on Saturday. He's got a perfectly good chance whoever was aboard. But looking forward, as I say, if you're going to maybe win an ARC, you'd rather have a jockey who's more experienced on the bigger stage internationally. And same with the Breeders' Cup. I just think they might be planning a long-term strategy with the horse. I don't think it's of a great significance who rides him on Saturday, but it's Colin Keane, and that's how it is. But long-term, I think they're probably thinking, let's get the experienced international jockey.
Colin Keane, top class, but you do feel for Rob Hornby seems to be the sentiment of that. So let's deal with who's going to win the race. Sam, I'll kick off with you.
Yeah, as Pat says, the pace angles look to be either Broome or Pile Driver, and I think that'll suit Westover. He's a strong stayer at 12, isn't he? Not that, Emily Upjohn isn't, and possibly Mishriff, but I think Westover, surely he'll just get a similar sort of ride, all being well, as he got at the Curragh, sit on the sort of the quarters of the pace setters, turn for home, kick, and pull the speed out of one or two of the others. That's the way that it looks the best way to go for me with Westover. An uncomplicated horse that settles well, has that acceleration, and I think he'll be a hard horse to fetch out in the Ascot Straight if he keeps straight.
Obviously, by the way, you mentioned Mishriff, David Egan and Prince Faisal no longer a retainer for David Egan. Seemingly his choice, he didn't want to sign, was the suggestion.
I'm not, Rish, between you and I and nobody else, this isn't to go any further, but I'm not sure that was an accurate representation, to be honest.
Okay, all right. We won't mention that to anyone else then.
No, keep it under your hat.
Possibly James Doyle, best available. So who's best available? James Doyle's picked up a few rides on horses owned by Prince Faisal in the last week or so. Pat, your thoughts on the winner of the King George?
Yeah, I would quite like to see Holly Doyle aboard Mishriff. I think that would add colour and excitement to the race. And John Gosden's used her before. Wouldn't that be a story? I just thought of Westover when he won the Irish Star. I wasn't really paying a great deal of attention to him. I was at the races and I just saw him win. It was only this morning when I watched him bounding away in the last furlong. I thought, my God, that was ultra impressive. So sometimes you're better off just going with your eyes, I think. And my eyes told me Westover. I'm just going to keep with him until he gets beat. Yeah.
Probably worth mentioning that I think Mishriff might finish second. I do like Westover to win. Mishriff, remember the way he travelled into the race last year behind Adeyard, similar to what you were describing, Sam, about how you think Westover might be ridden and how Colin Keane might ride the race. Sit pretty handy, pick up the leader, sent on, same as Adeyard last year, and then leave it to Mishriff to travel on and finish second, maybe. I thought that's how the race might unfold. Worth mentioning, obviously, about the quality of the race and the tactics. I think Pat mentioned that Broome is likely to go on. Is that what you think?
Yeah, I mean, you'd think so. You'd think so, given how events panned out at Royal Ascot, that Broome was given an ultra aggressive ride there, and that looks the one way to go with him. I mean, he's a remorseless galloper, hasn't really got to change a gear as such, not compared to, say, an Emily Upjohn or a Westover. And so I think that's definitely the way to go with him. You know, whether that will quite suit Mishriff quite so much, 12 furlongs at a really strong gallop, whereas that 10, where he can just use that raking stride at York, is absolutely ideal for him. So there'll be just a little question mark over Mishriff in this race for me, and yeah, very much in the Westover camp.
Yeah, all right. So that's a look at the big race on Saturday, King George. I think there's a general consensus that Westover is going to take all the beating, but I do like Mishriff. Nice run at in the Eclipse at Sandown, and I hope he runs well again. The Moet and Chandon International Stakes. I remember the race back in the day. Horses like Decorated Hero, carrying big weights in that. The Royal Hunt Cup winner, Dark Shift in there. Pat, what's the market with Bet365 saying?
Well, we're around about 9 the field at the moment, Rishi, and we're maybe on course for the maximum field of 29 runners. So, pay attention to the prices on the day and the each way terms. If there is 26 plus go, I'm sure you're able to get 5 places and even 6 places. So there might not be a great deal of movement in the market. We normally look upon this as being a wide open race, but the 9-2 favourite has won the running of this in his last 2 times, Dania for Owen Burrows and Blue Mist for Roger Charlton. And so it's not quite necessarily a bookie's benefit, this race, by any means. So struggling at the moment to find a favourite. My eye's drawn a little bit to Air of George Bowe. He's just had the one run, one-handedly enough at Yarmouth on his reappearance last month. But there's some very familiar old horses in this race. Dark Shift, Jumbie, who ran so well in the Bunbury. Fresh is always a popular horse. He's got form figures that would make a liar of that. But he's every time he runs, he seems to be well backed, and he's going to be very much to the fore as well. But I don't know. I think this is a wide open race. The draw may not be that illuminating. Dania won from 4 last year. The year before was 19 Blue Mist. So we'll have to wait and see what the ground is and so forth on the day. So it's going to take a while to unravel this one, really. But if I had to go for one now, I'd have Air.
All right, Air. Sam, what about you?
Yeah, not a race that I've managed to get my teeth into just yet, Rish. But there's a couple of interesting horses that have made the 5-day declarations. Ross Colin being one of them. I mean, his run was too bad to be true at Newmarket last time. Finished last of 18. But going into that race, I think Connections were very optimistic about his chance and thought that he was even better form than he was at Royal Ascot, and where he finished a very eye-catching 3rd to Inver Park. So maybe a switch to this switch to this track, and just a couple of weeks off from Newmarket, and he might just be a revitalised customer. Got some old favourites in there, usual suspects. I mean, Chief of Chiefs of this world and Rising Sands. Great to see those old stages back. And you can see Chief of Chiefs certainly running well if the ground stayed quick. One of the horse that Pat touched on that I quite like as well is Air. I think George Bowe at the moment in these races, you've just got to pay close attention to whatever he runs. Now he's got 3 in it. Koi, Inver Park obviously won the 7 furlong handicap at Royal Ascot, and Air. So it'll be very interesting to see what he does actually run in this race, because he's just absolutely mustard at the moment, as we've seen all season.
I'm going to throw another old timer into the mix. Dear old Accidental Agent. His record in handicaps, especially at Ascot, is outstanding, and he was 2nd in the Victoria Cup this year to Vafortino. He won at Newmarket earlier in the year. His run at Ascot, where he finished last, was obviously in the Queen Anne behind Baid. So happy to forgive that. Like I said, his runs in handicaps at Ascot have been very good. I think he's only a pound higher than the 2nd in the Victoria Cup, and he's a horse I think you can rely on to run a decent race. I don't think it was that bad a run in the Bet365 Bunbury Cup when he was 7th behind Bless Him. So I might have a few pounds each way on that old boy.
Rich, what about Bless Him as well? I mean, there weren't many horses that week, as Pat can testify, he was there all week, that came from off the pace to win those races, and yet he did all the way up the standside rail. Sort of won like a 3-year-old that was off about 7-11, didn't he? With Franny Norton, age 24, on his back. I mean, he just absolutely bolted up, even at the age of 8. if you give him the right set of circumstances, i.e. a bit of a pace collapse on a track that he loves, he's just in rude health at the moment. I mean, he won a competitive handicap pretty tidily, didn't he?
I was going to say, there wouldn't be many horses to compile the list of handicap wins that he has, Pat. He is, dear old bless him. But his style of running gives him a shot when they go so hard.
Yeah, and you'd presume, wouldn't you, Jamie Spencer will be back on board, and Jamie Spencer up the straight at Ascot is always worth an extra couple of pounds as well. So David Simcock, I was lucky enough to present the trophy to him after the race, and he said all my horses have really hit top form at the moment, and none more so than that fella. And as Sam said there, you didn't want to be held up last in Newmarket on that particular day, but he did, and he won handily enough. He won. He put the race to bed very, very well, but. Yeah, it's funny how we're all going for these old timers, aren't we? The 8-year-olds and the 9-year-olds.
I think there's some sort of reverse psychology in that from us. We're probably reaching a little bit. Pat mentioned Air to Air, George Bowie's stable. There's Inver Park, who won the Buckingham Palace at Royal Ascot and finished ahead of Ropey Guest and Ross Colin, Chief of Chiefs that day. So there's so many horses. We haven't even mentioned Dark Shift properly in the.
No.
That was an impressive win at the Royal Meeting as well in the Hunt Cup.
Yeah, absolutely adores Ascot as well, doesn't he? Dark Shift.
Yeah, it's interesting though. We're trying to look for the 7 furlong specialist, and you're trying to evaluate a horse that wins over a mile or runs well over a mile. Can he take the drop down a furlong? And the same with the horses moving up. So that's why Jumbie is one that catches my eye a bit, because I was always thinking he was a 6 furlong horse, but Christoph Summingham rode him in the Bunbury Cup, and he came to win there. And I think Connections were satisfied. Yep, he does get the 7. So he's another one. It's desperately hard to draw a line through any of them, really, as things stand at the moment. So we'll be on weather watch and draw watch. That'll be vital.
The beauty with Jumbie, sorry to jump in, Rich, but the beauty with Jumbie is Ascot puts less strain on or has less effect on slow starters, doesn't it, really? Because that's often the ideal way to ride the track. So it doesn't impair their chance so much.
Yeah, it gives him a shot, but obviously he'd be playing second fiddle to his stablemate. Accidentally. So just in summary, because we're coming up to the end of this week's episode, if I could ask you both for one thing that you want to happen more than anything else this weekend, whether it's a winner, a jockey to have a winner, a trainer to have a winner. It looks like I've caught you both on the back foot because you're both doing that. If I look away, he won't ask me first. So either of you ready with one thing that you want to happen this weekend or this week even coming up in the sport of horse racing?
I'll go first if I may. Rain. Every trainer I speak to says, how's your horse? He says, yeah, it's very well, but he wants rain. So
I'll speak the wizened head.
Yeah, that's what they want. You're talking about that race at Ascot, Raising Sands. I was with Jamie Osborne on Friday night. He won the race 3 years ago. He's on track to run in it again, but he said he won't run if it's firm. And then I was speaking to other trainers. We want rain. William Haggis, we want rain. So let's all do a rain dance and let's get the word soft in the going descriptions.
Not many people like to make it public that we're with Jamie Osborne.
No. I was just thinking he's done well to emerge on a Monday afternoon, hasn't he?
I've got my "and I survived" badge on as well. So.
12 paracetamol later, isn't it?
All right, Sam, have you got something?
Do you know what? I don't think I have. I don't know what I want. I'd like to see Westover win the King George in the style of a bloody good horse, because we've been going on about him for much of the season. Ever since sort of Sandown, we were doing these pods, and he was a bit of an eye catcher there, wasn't he? In the Bet365 trial there, and obviously went to the Derby, and we were strong on him for the Irish Derby. So I'd like to see him confirm his status as, arguably, or certainly right up there amongst the 3-year-old colts this year.
All right, I would like to see a clean race in the King George, and that we just enjoy the race, and then at the end of the weekend, we just reflect on what a great race we've had, what a great week we've had, and not worry about sackings, sabbaticals, jockey changes, whip, interference rules, prize money, and fixture list. Just for 1 week, it would be nice just for the racing to be centre stage and not have any distractions, and hopefully the King George will provide that. That is just about it for this week's episode of Racing Weekly, brought to you by oddschecker in association with Bet365. Thanks, as always, to Sam Turner. for being alongside me, and of course for Pat Cooney for bringing the Bet365 angle to the show. Both of you stay safe, stay out of the sun long enough, hydrate and put on sun cream, especially you, Pat, if you go outside. As always, if you've liked what you've heard or watched, then please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or in the comment section on YouTube. We'll be back next week. We'll have a look back at the King George before looking ahead to glorious Goodwood, or the Qatar Goodwood Festival, and we'll be joined by Richard Hoyles, ITV commentator, to help us look ahead to that, and of course to reflect on hopefully some exciting stuff from Ascot. But for now, from Pat, Sam, myself and the team at Racing Weekly, bye-bye.